there, and welcome back to another Do Good Better luncheon with the Harvest Development Group. And today we're very fortunate to have Marty Rotblatt. Marty is the principal of Nonprofits Work, and they've got clients all over the country, and they focus on board development, board governance. And that's really what we're going to be speaking about today. So we're very fortunate to have you today, Marty. And so let's talk a little bit about what we should be focusing on with our boards as we live through this COVID-19 world.
Well, thank you, Scott. First of all, there's a very well-known quote from Peter Drucker, who's a well-known management consultant. And Peter said, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things. And on top of that, to kind of balance it in today's world, there's a Chinese proverb that says, and excuse me for mentioning China, I know that's where this COVID thing supposedly began. There's a proverb that says, a crisis is an opportunity riding on a dangerous wind. And when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger, and the other character represents opportunity. And I think that that's where we are today, is that this period of time, although it's danger, it's a challenge, it does offer opportunity to do things that many organizations should have been doing. Some are doing them, but there are a lot of things that they could be doing right now that are cost effective or actually no cost at all. So this presents an opportunity, I feel, to move forward and create a more value and positive mission impact, rather than just bounce back to the status quo, which eventually organizations will probably do, and that's unfortunate. It's not forward-looking.
Right.
So, what can a board do to sustain its mission and continue to make an important impact? So I actually have three questions, and I'm not going to look for answers right now, but answer them yourselves. And that is, first of all, has your organization lost its momentum? Assuming that there was momentum. If there wasn't momentum, then you need to take a step back and reevaluate on a different level, a different plane. Mm-hmm. Number two is, are you facing financial difficulties? And again, if this is something that's been occurring for a long time, then it should be no surprise that it's continuing to occur. And number three, which I think is a really big thing, is that our organization's missing out on networking and connection opportunities. And considering that we're no longer face-to-face the way we used to be, the answer is, to me, the answer to that question is yes, virtually every organization is missing out on those. So with that, I think we begin to move into, okay, well, what can you do? So if that's a good place to start, then let's go.
Absolutely, yeah. I think these are all these three topics are very important to tackle. So looking forward to it. Yeah.
Good. Well, first of all, it's important to understand that we need to respond from our hearts, and that's really what the foundation of nonprofits are. It's heart work. Mm-hmm. Not hard work, although it is, but it's heart work. It's right here.
Yeah.
But we also need to respond from our heads. And as we know, the situation that we're dealing with currently is changing day by day, even hour by hour. Governors are giving up new proclamations every day, and they're redoing their proclamations. But it's important that organizations from the board level take decisive action with courage, and oftentimes it's based on information that is imperfect, but they know that they need to act with expediency. And during this kind of a crisis or an opportunity, as I'm going to suggest, cognitive overload can occur. There can just be too much coming in, and how do you sift through all that information? Information's incomplete. Interests and priorities might clash. Emotions, we know, run high. Anxieties run high among staff, among donors, among all the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And analysis paralysis can result easily. And the trick for boards is to break through that inertia. Is how do you get through that? And one way, a trick, which should be done anyways, is to make sure that your priorities are defined, and they're defined clearly. And identify, in this particular situation, identify 3 to 5 of the most important priorities. And also take the time to brainstorm and identify possible and potential new opportunities. Some of these might involve dollars and cents. Some of them could involve volunteer hours or time. So they could involve various resources. But at least take the time to identify them, and then identify the decision makers who are able and willing to step up and help with these. And those decision makers, to a very large extent, should be on the board. You know, going back to the Drucker about doing the right things and doing them right, they should be on the board, because the board is the one who theoretically should be setting a strategy. So there are a couple things to really press on here. One is to keep in mind, and we emphasize this when we do a lot of strategic thinking with groups, is mission first, always and always. ALWAYS and ALLWAYS. Revisit your vision for social impact, the impact you're trying to create and how you plan to create it. Revisit your case for existing, and that should be a document that says, this is who we are, this is why we exist, this is our cause, this is what we want to accomplish, and this is a good time to kind of refine that if needed. And if you need to revise the value of that work in the current context, then do that. It doesn't change your mission, but it certainly presents a different approach or a different way of looking at it to the outside world. And that's really important. And that could be for donors, partners, staff, it could be for anyone. And as part of that, and I mentioned this earlier, make sure that the organization is engaged in a continuous process of strategic thinking, not planning, thinking. Develop a strategy, not just a plan. It's not a once a year event.
Yeah, so my question would be,
yeah.
So a nonprofit has a strategic plan, maybe it's a 3-year planning document. How often should the board be addressing that document? Is it every board meeting should have they should revisit and pick up a piece? Is it annually? You know, what's the best practice?
Well, we've recommended the following. First of all, it can't hurt to have a once a year planning or strategic planning retreat.
Yep.
But between those two retreats, strategic thinking and the process of monitoring and revising and redoing parts of it and making adjustments, that should be taking place on a regular basis. So our recommendation has always been that every board meeting, and nowadays they're virtual, but every board meeting should have a section of it designed or put aside for strategic thinking, for strategic monitoring. The key is, and we know this from experience, is to put this at the top of the agenda. Because if you put it at the end of the agenda, what's going to happen is the day-to-day stuff that comes up is going to take over. And the day-to-day stuff is fine, but that's management. And the board's job, unless the board is actually involved in management, the board's job is not management. So it should be, again, an ongoing process. We developed many years ago a planning sheet that you constantly update. And if you put it online, whether Google Docs or you use some kind of shared service, shared document, people can update it, and then you actually use that during your meeting. And it's very valuable. People can visually see where they're at on various goals and then the actions to achieve those goals.
Excellent.
So the other thing that I encourage and a lot of people don't do it, is to practice the value of inquiry. Ask questions. Boards, they're actually one of their duties or responsibilities is to ask questions and to demand answers, not just to ask the questions, but to demand the answers. And keep in mind, people love to give advice. I don't know about you, Scott, but when people say to me, gee, Marty, I'd love for advice on something, it goes right to my head. It's an ego thing. We love to give advice.
Sure.
Seek advice. What worked yesterday may not work today. So you need to make sure that you're asking a lot of different people. You could be asking them different questions, the same questions. You could have your board develop, especially in this time of opportunity, you could have your board build a new networked advisory group that is focused on the mission impact that is associated with what's going on. I know Harvest is working with a number of groups dealing with camps. Well, that's a huge challenge right now, is how summer camps are going to launch. Are they going to launch? If they do launch, do they launch face-to-face, in person, or do they launch virtually, or is there a combination? So it's important to get that feedback from stakeholders. The other thing that I encourage groups to do, especially this time in the process, this time of the crisis or the opportunities, is do a strategic program analysis. Look at every single thing you do. You do a newsletter, if you run a gala, if you do a video series, whatever it is, start an annual process of doing a program analysis of each of those programs, and do it annually. You can do it on a rolling basis, so you might do 2 or 3 programs a month, or maybe you do a few programs every quarter or whatever, but do a strategic program analysis, and that will help you determine whether certain programs should continue, whether they should be discontinued, and whether there are new programs that need to be created. Most groups don't do that. It's because we've always done it that way attitude, as opposed to, gee, maybe this isn't working anymore. So that's something else to think about. Decide what not to do in addition to what to do. And you need to ruthlessly prioritize in today's world, especially because of the financial issues that many groups are dealing with. Nonprofits need to be financially viable to deliver impact. It's the word nonprofit does not mean that they don't make money.
Right.
They're a business. They're just a different form of business. Sustainable organizations have predictable and reliable revenue and expenses that line up with that, and cash on hand to cover routine and emergency needs. Our recommendation has always been have at least 6 months operating. Given today's world, I would suggest 9 to 12 months operating. I never would have thought that, but that's what we're thinking now. There's a terrific website that has some resources on it. It's called the Nonprofit Finance Fund. Nonprofit Finance Fund, and they have a financial self-assessment worksheet that's free to use. And I'll mention them again in a few minutes. Think of this right now, and recent research is showing this. Almost 2/3 of all nonprofit organizations, and they're about 1.5, 1.6 million in this country, are experiencing conditions that threaten their long-term financial stability. 2/3. And even more of those expect this to continue into the months ahead. So I'm thinking that perhaps as many as 1/3 of all nonprofits are going to fold within the next, 3, 4, 5 months. I know that here in Connecticut, a regional Audubon society closed after existing for a long, long time. So we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So what can the board do right now? And I think that's really part of the key. And of course, this means you have to have a board that's engaged. So we're not going to get into, how do you determine if you have an engaged board, but that is different topic, different day, different time. And there are tools to figure that out. So what are monthly operating costs that you just can't get away from? How much cash does an organization have on hand? And I'm not talking about playing games with numbers. How much cash do they actually have? Are you paying today's bills or yesterday's bills with tomorrow's income? Or are you paying today's bills, yesterday's bills with income that you've stored up? And how long can you sustain if things don't go smoothly? Look at the diversification of your revenue. You should have multiple revenue streams, not just one. I have a dear friend who's involved to a very large extent with national organizations that hold very large conferences. Their conferences have all been canceled.
Yep.
And some of these conferences provide 60, 70, 80% of operating expenses. And many of these are membership organizations. So they're going to be in really bad shape in spite of the membership, which is continuous usually. But the revenue from conferences is going to be, is going to be huge. Create financial scenarios, financial scenario plans, a best, a worst, expected, unexpected, think outside the box. I know I'm not a writer. I don't write fiction, but I'll tell you right now, there is no way that I could have written a book of fiction, sci-fi, mystery, or anything that would have addressed what's going on today. There's just no way.
Right.
The nonprofit finance fund that I mentioned a few minutes ago also has a free scenario planning template. Again, these are really terrific resources, and there are other resources out there, but if people go to their website, you can find that. Have honest conversations with donors, with stakeholders, and I use stakeholders in a very broad sense. So if you're a camp, like a summer camp,
Yep.
your stakeholders are your board, your members, your donors,
Your parents,
families that
alumni.
attend, the kids. Have conversations with them. Make sure they understand what your needs are. That if it doesn't happen this summer, and you don't have the funding, it might not happen next summer. And I know that a number of groups, and I've been asked about this from groups that I support, have said, well, are you willing to donate today what you would donate 6 months from now to help us get through the next 6 months? So those are questions you can certainly ask. And part of that will help you to predict revenue streams. Do you have any questions so far, Scott?
Yeah, a couple things came up. So I think a lot about, I've run nonprofits as you have as well, and I think about vendors.
Yeah.
And what's the role maybe a board can have with vendors? Either, should vendors be on our boards? Are there opportunities for that? Or should we be negotiating with vendors at this point if it comes down to it, that, postponing maybe fees due or other types of renegotiating some contracts? What's your thought?
Well, first of all, let's understand that's an excellent question. What kind of vendors we're talking about. So if you're a summer camp, and I'll come back to the camp concept. If you're a summer camp, your vendors are going to be cleaning crews. They're going to be crews or organizations that are going to provide food, perhaps.
Transportation.
They're going to provide materials for whatever it is you're doing. Many of those aren't going to be able to be delivered. I know that restaurants in this area were handing out toilet paper with takeout orders.
Yeah.
That's and they couldn't control that vendor. So let me answer your question. You asked a couple questions. First of all, should they be on the board? Only if they're willing to subjugate or to minimize their interest in their own business. If their interest is in the organization and the cause, absolutely, there's no reason. But when it comes up and they need to recuse themselves in terms of a business decision that could impact them, then they need to pull away. But talk to them. They need to understand. Believe me, today they understand what's going on better than probably any other time of crisis or opportunity that I've been through. So that's an excellent question, but vendors are part of that stakeholder group without any discussion. And keep in mind that, you know, whether it's your grantors are as well. And some of them might have funds that you're not aware of. So it's an opportunity to ask about those funds. So going on with the board members, they have to take personal ownership. Keep in mind, and board members, I don't think are trained well enough to understand this. They are the legal trustees of the organization because, as you know, Scott, nonprofits don't own, they don't have any owners. So the legal trustees of the organization are the board members, and every so many years that there's a turnover. So in a way, your owners, which aren't really owners, turn over every couple of years. That doesn't happen in business. And also keep in mind that serving on a nonprofit board is usually only as high, in my experience, as number 3 on someone's priority list. Usually the first thing I know on my list is family.
Sure.
And the second thing on my list is to make sure that my family is well cared for, which means work or a job.
Right.
So if my volunteer work comes in 3rd or maybe even 4th, there might be something else hopping in front of it. Nonprofits need to keep that in mind, that this is not usually the priority of a person. And it is a critical part of their legal duty. It's called the duty of loyalty to an organization. It's actually a legal concept. And keep in mind that the board needs to work very well with the current staffing or executive leadership. And that is something that under these kinds of conditions is often tested. And not only is it tested between the board and the chief executive of the organization, but it's also tested between the board, that chief executive, and the staff of that organization. This is a time where, talk about stress and anxiety, there's a tremendous amount.
So would you recommend more frequent board meetings or at least board interactions during this time?
You know, that's an excellent question. I've had boards meet every week, which I think is excessive.
Yeah.
I've had them meet once a month, which I think is pretty on point. I've had boards meet quarterly. I've had a couple boards that only meet every 6 months. I would suggest in this time of challenge that boards meet once a month, that there be a specific agenda, that the board meetings last no longer than an hour and a half. Any more than that, you're going to lose people, especially if they're home like you and I are home today. Yeah. You know, it's part of that challenge of resources and delivering, having the capacity to deliver on what an organization does. And board members and their time and their energy, and in most cases, I hope, their money, are certainly a resource for an organization. So organizations need to make sure all that's in place and to make sure that the boards are committed to it. The other part of this is another important part, I think, is to make sure that boards are willing to make quick decisions. Nonprofits are not known for their speed in making decisions.
And being nimble, yeah.
They're not known for being nimble or agile. And yet in today's world, we need to be mobile. We need to be agile and nimble. We have to be. Frequent and transparent communications with staff between the board and the executive are really, really critical. They're critical all year round, but they're really critical now to assure people that things are going okay or that they're not going okay. And staff needs to know that. Donors need to know that. And another discussion is whether or not the board is practicing good governance. And there's some checklists that can be made available. In fact, I think Harvest even has a checklist that's available to deal with those kinds of things. So I mentioned earlier, yeah, go ahead, Scott, sorry.
I was just gonna say, you know, when I think about boards, a lot of times I think about the skill set that they bring.
Yes.
Maybe you've got a CPA that's on your board. maybe that person can help out with some financial management issues, cash flow issues. Maybe, you've got a board member who is, in a marketing role at their firm or their company, so they maybe could provide some of that assistance as well. How do you measure strengths and weaknesses of a board?
Good question. Actually, two things. First of all, Harvest has on its website, I believe it's still there, has a matrix, has a competency skills matrix that we developed, that boards can take and assess what they have on hand. And that also shows you the gaps. So what is it you need to bring in? So to me, that's an important assessment. It should be done anyways. But in today's world, look, if you have board members that aren't doing anything, they shouldn't be board members.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that they just shouldn't be board members. I have a new group that I'm working with that has been legally in existence for about a year, but conceptually they've been operating for about 2 years. They have a new executive director. They're very tiny. Their budget is probably about 40 to 50,000, so they're really small. Mm. But one of the things they said to me was, well, we only have 9 board members and our 7 board members, and our bylaws allow for 11. And what I said was, well, maybe you don't need 11. If you have the right people on the right bus and the right seats, then you don't need 11. So the key is to have the right people. It's not numbers, but you're right. It's what expertise do you need? In today's world, certainly social media is critical. Yeah. Finance, someone who really knows how to read and understand, and not just a bean counter, but really needs to understand financials and what they mean and be able to project. So those I think are really important things to do. Again, it's something we've been pushing for a long time. And there's nothing wrong within a group making those kinds of adjustments very quickly. The ability for an organization to adapt today, and going back to the agility and nimbleness, is really important. And for them to look long term. When I say long term, please understand, long term is not what it used to be. Long term is 6 to 12 months now. I have a group that I've been in contact with that said, we are operating on a 3-month on a 3-month period. And I said, no, if you're operating on 3 months, you might as well just close. Right. Operate on 6 to 12 months. Figure out where you're going to be 6 months, 12 months. If you're not going to be where you want to be 6 months from now, then maybe you should consider not existing unless you really fill some gap that is not being filled anywhere at all. The other thing to keep in mind is this is a great opportunity to collaborate.
Absolutely.
There are organizations that are maybe not doing exactly or have the same mission cause that you have, but maybe it's similar. And these are opportunities to work together on some really interesting projects, and even to raise money in some very unusual ways. And the other thing I want to mention, and this we talked about at one point before we came online today, is make sure that your organization has technology capacity. Having tech systems in place to address today's challenges is critical. And although the cost may seem prohibitive, the benefits far outweigh the costs. And there are some funds available, grants, to help organizations beef up their technology needs. And keep in mind, technology is the tool nowadays to help build brand awareness, to help deliver communications, and to show innovation. Groups that show that, I think, are going to survive. And the right tech can improve operational efficiencies. It can inspire innovation. It can enhance the delivery on mission. So it's really, really critical to have that. Salesforce, which is and this isn't a plug, which does research as well, a survey recently found that 85% of nonprofits say technology is important to their long-term success. And yet only 23% of those have long-term strategy for how they're going to use technology. So
Really?
they recognize it, but they're not doing it.
Yeah.
The last major thing I want to mention is engagement. I know it's been a catchphrase for many years, but communication is critical. How you're doing, sharing goals, be upfront and transparent. Transparency should be an integral part of an organization's culture. It ensures that donors, stakeholders, interested members of the public have access to appropriate information about who you are, how you're doing. Exceptional boards see a link of their bold visions and plans for financial support to the networks that they've built. So it's important to communicate with those networks. Don't let the networks down to find out. They shouldn't be coming to you for information. You should be going to them. And if board members have not made your nonprofit a priority and one of the top giving priorities, they need to consider it now. Of any times, this is it. So I have a few final thoughts, Scott, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
And some of these are not related to things I mentioned. This is a great opportunity for boards and staff and chief executive officers to interview people for potential positions, potential A staffers and potential A board members. This is a great opportunity. Some people are unemployed and looking for work, but it can't hurt to interview them and to build up a cadre of resumes that you can someday go back to, because I'm an optimist. We will go back. So this is a great opportunity to review and modify marketing and promotional materials. Review them. Are they current? Research and see what other cause organizations are doing and create a support network. And when you create that support network, meet with them periodically via Zoom or whatever other tool you're going to use. Dust off policies and procedures and systems and revise them as needed. We let them sit too long. And develop a strategic action plan document. And this goes back to what you said about how often should you be doing strategic thinking, and use that document at every board meeting so that people can see and monitor objectives and specific actions. So moving back to our theme for today, more than ever, I think it's critical for nonprofits boards to engage, to change the way they govern and do the right things that probably could and should have been done in the past. And remember that proverb that I start off with, that a crisis is an opportunity riding on a dangerous wind. I love that. It's got a nice ring to it.
Excellent. And and I'm sure Marty is available for support as you look to develop your board and come up with governance guidelines and planning, and we've partnered with Marty before. He's got a fantastic breadth on the in depth on boards and the roles and responsibilities, and again, it's a very important piece to focus on right now. So I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your time today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so if anyone is interested in getting in touch, we will forward information to Marty. You can use our email at roots@harvestdevelopmentgrp.com. And we thank everyone for attending and watching, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott.